Thank you very much. Is this on? Yeah, cool. First of all, very good morning to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and thanks to the organizer for inviting me. I'm afraid my Spanish is not quite good enough to give you a talk in Spanish, but hopefully I'll try and speak slowly, and the translation devices should hopefully help. So my name is Spela Godec, and I'm an education researcher at University College London Institute of Education. I've been working on a project focusing on inequalities in science education and how we might be able to support diverse students to engage with science. Well, the work I'll be talking about was done in the United Kingdom. I know that many of these issues are very relevant to other European countries and beyond, as we also heard in the session just before mine. So I hope it can offer some thoughts and ideas for the Spanish context as well. I love seeing how many people were very active on Twitter yesterday and earlier today. So if you want to join the Twitter conversation, at the bottom of all the slides are our Twitter details. I might just go with that. Okay, so there'll be three parts to my talk today. I'm going to start by giving you a brief background on the inequalities in science education that we've been researching and present some of the key findings from our studies. I'm then going to introduce this idea of science capital, what it is and why it matters in science education, particularly when we think about equity. And in the third part, I will speak about how we put our research into practice and how we worked with teachers across the UK to develop a science capital teaching approach. So on to the first section. So at the heart of our project is concerned with inequalities, which we think are both an economic and a social justice concern. Across Europe, and I think in Spain as well, issues have been raised about the numbers of people choosing science and also who is choosing science. And we know that the demographic is still often quite narrow, both in terms of gender, but also socioeconomic background and ethnicity, particularly in the more ethnically diverse countries such as the United Kingdom. And over the past decades, there's been lots of money and efforts put into trying to broaden participation in science. But we know that there has been relatively little change, especially in terms of participation rates and profile. And lots of efforts still seem to be focused on making science more interesting and more fun. But the findings of our study suggest that that might not be where the main problems lie. So over the past 10 years, the Aspires project has been studying young people's science aspirations. We were interested in how aspirations develop, how they change over time, and what are the factors influencing them. Are you okay? Yeah. This has been one of the largest studies of its kind, and we had over 40,000 students completing our surveys, students aged from 10 to 18. And on top of all these surveys, we also did hundreds of interviews with students and teachers and parents to really try and understand how the inspirations form and change. We've written extensively about the findings of our project, and there's lots of academic and practitioners' publications on our website that I will give you later on. But I want to highlight three. First, that lack of interest in science is not the main issue. Two, that aspirations are socially patterned by gender, but also by many other factors. And three, that these trends often start very early on, that already at the age 10 or 11, lots of young people, even if they find science interesting, they think that science is not for them. So this slide illustrates the first point I was making, that young people seem to like science, but few aspire to be scientists. And as this graph showed, that across different ages, young people think they learn interesting things in science. This percentage is actually quite high, which might be surprising. Young people also, in high percentage, think that their parents think that it's important to learn science, and they think that scientists do valuable work. But this doesn't translate to them wanting to work in science in the future, whether we ask for scientists or science-related professions. So what do young people in the UK aspire to do? Business seems to be particularly popular, and that's followed by working in design, becoming a celebrity, becoming a teacher, doctor, lawyer, and the scientist comes much later down. So I said we were particularly interested in what are the factors that shape these aspirations. Clearly, these are multiple and very complex. They include gender, ethnicity, social class, often geographic location. They also include careers education, how much careers education students get, whether they get any at all. Features of the education system. In the UK, for example, students have to choose at quite an early age which of the science route they will continue. And if they're not in the right route, it'll be quite difficult to carry on with science post 16, which is the age of the compulsory education. And then on top of these, we found that there was a set of other variables that had an important impact on what young people were aspiring to do. And we labeled these as a group science capital. So science capital, what is it and why does it matter? So I thought to illustrate what constitutes science capital, we can do a little activity. I'm going to read. Okay, cool. I'm going to read a list of statements, and I'm going to ask you if you agree with the statement, or if a statement is true for you, to raise your hand and show how many points you get. So this is clearly not as rigorous as a research instrument, but I think it will give you a bit of a flavor of what kind of things we were asking the students to establish what kind of science capital score they have. All right, so first one. Do you have a science or maths post-compulsory qualification? You get 1 point for each qualification. There's got to be some points in this audience. Thank you. Second one, does your partner, keep your hands up, carry on the points. Does your partner have a science or maths post-compulsory qualification? You get 1 point per qualification that they have. You gotta keep adding the points. Do your parents have a science or maths post-compulsory qualification? 1 point per parent per qualification. Is anyone in your close family studying for a STEM degree at the moment? You get 1 point per person, only close family counts. People who may have reached 10 points already, stand up and start again. I've done this one already. Do you often talk to close family or friends about science or science-related issues? Lots of yeses for this one. If yes, you get 1 point. When you were growing up, did anyone specifically encourage you to continue with science? You get 1 point per person. When you were growing up, did anyone specifically explain the value of science qualifications to you? Would you say you are up to date with recent major scientific developments? Yeah, quite a lot. Do you regularly read about science in magazines or newspapers? Yes. That's a strong audience, I think, for Science Capital. But I wanted to give you, it's not to see how much science capital you get, but to get a flavor. And a lot of your students, if you imagine, my only answer positively to some of these questions. Okay, a few more. Do you think science is boring? This one's the obvious, the other way around. You don't get a point for yes, you get a point for no. Do you have more than 100 books at home? If yes, you get 1 point. Do you often watch science programs on TV? Yeah, lots of science programs, audience. Do you often visit science museums and science centers, excluding today? You know how to test a hypothesis. I'm just going to skip one. Okay, last one. Do you think that science qualifications predominantly lead to jobs in science and medicine? If you think no, you get a point. If you think yes. All right, so I'm not at all surprised that a lot of you in this audience would have high science capital. But as I mentioned, you might imagine that a lot of the students that you are teaching or working with may only answer positively to some of these questions. So the science capital may not be as high as yours. All right. So we try to imagine science capital as a bag or a hold-on that contains all your science-related resources and dispositions. And this bag of science capital includes what you know, how you think about science, what you do, and who you know. And I'm now going to show you a short animation that illustrates what science capital is about. If I can make this work. The sound. It should have gone on by now. Is it just here, or do we? Give us 1 second. Where's my tech friend? It starts in a little bit. Yes. Go. Thank you.
But we're still facing a STEM skills gap, and the students taking STEM subjects up to 16 still fall into roughly the same gender, ethnic and social groups as they did 20 years ago. That's why BP, King's College London and the Science Museum are collaborating to develop, measure and test a new concept that gets to the heart of how people engage with science. It's called Science Capital. A person's science capital is like a holder or bag that they carry around with them, into which they put all their science-related knowledge, attitudes, skills and experiences. The science capital each person has splits into 4 main types. What you know, how you think, what you do, and who you know. Everyone has different amounts of science capital, and this affects whether they feel, yes, science is for me, or not. Our research shows that the more science capital a child has, the more likely they are to follow STEM subjects. Science capital comes from a variety of sources, including school, home and family, out-of-school science learning, and the things people experience in their everyday lives. It helps us see all the influences that lead to students choosing STEM subjects or not, and understand why different groups aren't taking them further. We can also use science capital as a tool to develop more effective ways of supporting young people to engage with science. And by building science capital of all children, more students from more diverse backgrounds will engage with science throughout their lives. Together, we can use the concept of science capital not only to bridge the STEM skills gap, but also to improve the life chances of all our children.
Okay, so what does science capital distribution look like? In a nationally representative sample that we surveyed, we've identified that about 5% of students had high science capital, about 69 had medium science capital, and 27 had low science capital. But more interesting, perhaps, was the demographic of these different groups. And high science capital, we found, included predominantly boys, included young people from a socially advantaged background, such as, for example, people whose parents went to university, who went to museum as a regular weekend activity, and so on. And in the case of the UK, young people from South Asian backgrounds who tend to be particularly keen and have very strong parental support to study science, particularly going towards lucrative careers like medicine and engineering. I imagine the situation would look quite different in Spain, and at the moment there's been interest from a couple of EU countries to try and do a similar study there, and we really look forward to seeing how these patterns may be the same or different in other countries. So why does science capital matter? So we know that young people with high science capital are significantly more likely to want to study science post-16, which is the end of compulsory education in the UK. And for example, they have stronger science identity. More of them agree that other people see them as science students. And the differences are quite significant. Among the high science capital people, 50% agree that they want to continue studying science at university, while among low science capital people, only 6% had that aspirations. When it comes to identity, among high science capital people, 80% agreed with the statement that other people think of them as a science person, while in the low science capital group, only 3% agreed with the same statement. So to imagine what a high science capital might look like, I'm going to read you a short description of one of the students that we call Joshua. So Joshua's mom works in a laboratory, and his dad is an engineer. They have high aspirations for Joshua to study at university and get a good job. Joshua thinks science is important for everyday life and hopes to become an inventor. He regularly reads science books and watches science-related videos on YouTube. And the family often visit museums during the weekends and holidays. For families like these, science was very much a part of the everyday. And as the mother of one of our students said, the other day in a car we were laughing about chemical symbols and things. So I guess it does come into discussion quite subliminally, really. And you might agree that it takes a particular kind of family that jokes about chemical symbols when they drive in a car. Tracy, on the other hand, illustrates what a lower science capital might look like. Tracy's mom works as a cleaner, and her dad is a car mechanic. No one from her immediate or extended family has ever attended university. And Tracy remarks that her mom often warns that university could be a difficult experience. Tracy hopes to become a celebrity, although she also talks about maybe working with animals, perhaps as a veterinary nurse. When asked about her knowledge of animals and animal health, she says that this does not count as science, so she doesn't think of herself as being sciencey or having science interests. So despite some interests, we'd say that Tracy's science capital score is relatively low. So maybe these examples prompt thinking whether you have encountered students that have lower or higher science capital, or what that meant for their engagement in the classroom. We do also know that the learning environment clearly matters, and the teachers can do a great deal to help support students to engage with science. So I wanted just to quickly present one of the studies that we did, where we spent a year observing 9 different science classes in London. And we were interested in what makes someone a good science student. So we both observed what sort of behaviors was, as we said, celebrated in the classroom, and also what teachers and students would say makes someone a science person. And over again, the behaviors that sort of came up from our analysis were falling into these 3 categories. They're about what we call muscular intellect, which means very confident, very loud displays of scientific knowledge. That was mostly done by boys and young people, students with higher science capital. There was behavior compliance, and there was tick box learning. And there was very little value, we often thought, being given to things like curiosity and creativity in the science classroom. So what can science capital offer to educators? We think it's a useful framework for understanding differential engagement, why it might be easier for some young people to engage with science and more difficult for others. We think it also offers a useful reflection framework for planning action, to think about beyond just trying to increase interest in science in our interventions. Science Capital also allowed us to devise an evidence-based pedagogical framework that helped diverse students engage with science. So I'll move now to my third part of the talk, discussing Science Capital teaching approach. So we wanted to explore how research insights could be used to change practice and how we might be able to support more young people to engage with science. I should mention that the ambition for us wasn't just to make sure more young people go on to study science post-16, but also to broaden engagement with science more broadly, and to realize that science skills are important, even if not going to a science job. So in parallel with the Aspires project that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, through a project called Enterprising Science, we focused on working collaboratively with teachers across the UK to develop a science capital teaching approach. So we ask ourselves, what could be done to change teaching practice to help more students engage with science? And over 4 years, we worked with 43 secondary science teachers. Secondary in the UK is 11 to 16, just for reference. And the teachers we worked with, most of them taught in urban areas. So they taught in areas with high economic deprivation, which in the UK is measured by the percentage of students that are eligible for free school meals from the school, and highly ethnically diverse student populations. So some of our classes had more than 10 different first languages spoken. So there was that level of diversity as well. So teachers worked with their existing curriculum, and we together worked with them to tweak their lessons plans. We spent many years sitting at the back of the classrooms, observing teachers, having reflection sessions with them afterwards, and also spoke to students to see what they thought of these different approaches. And after 4 years, we put the ideas and the resources that we developed with the teachers in a handbook for science teachers called the Science Capital Teaching Approach. I have one copy here. That's all I could bring on my hand luggage over from London. But the PDF is available for free on our website. I'll give you the link at the end of it. And if you send us an email, we are able to send a couple of packs out to you as well. So the Science Capital Teaching Approach book includes some of the examples I'll be going through, some of the observations from the lessons, as well as kind of practical material and some theory that we developed through the project. Okay. So what is this approach about? This approach is about a mindset rather than add-on materials, which was really important to our teachers because the very packed curriculum often didn't have much space to bring additional materials and resources in. So the teachers kind of went through that process of tweaking and reflecting on lessons. And the approach is based on the foundation of broadening what counts. Foundation of broadening what counts, and the three pillars that together comprise science capital teaching approach. Pillar 1 is personalizing and localizing science content. The second pillar is eliciting, valuing, and linking varied student experiences and skills and knowledge, also those that go beyond just curriculum science. And the third pillar is about explicitly building science capital dimensions. And what I'll do now is just talk through each of these four aspects, explain a bit the rationale for each of the aspects, what it is about, and give a brief illustrative example. And I got another nice video to show you at the end what this approach looked like in one of the schools we worked with in the north of England. So the foundation of broadening what counts addresses the challenge that science is often seen, and what is scientific is often seen quite narrowly. We know from research that already at a young age, a lot of young people have a view that science is for the clever, well-behaved students. Often that is for boys. Both boys and girls think that. So those perceptions of who science is for are very entrenched already at a young age. So with broadening what counts, teachers try to help students see that science can be for them. We know that students don't just find science concepts difficult, but that some struggle to identify and engage with science for other reasons as well. So how could teachers broaden what counts? They could try open up more ways that children can be recognized by others as being scientific, by recognize broader range of experiences, skills, and behaviors as having place in the science classrooms, and as, if I understood well enough in the previous session, the importance of challenging stereotypes that often through media, through various channels, young people are still exposed to very narrow representation of what it means to work in science and what sciences are. As one practical example, one of our teachers developed a short questionnaire. There's a full questionnaire in the handbook. This is just a little screenshot. Develop a short questionnaire to do with students where they asked them to think which characteristic they thought determined someone being a science person. And we have 9 characteristics here, and we know from research that the top 4 tend to be more commonly associated when we ask students what being science is about. So it's about being naturally clever, getting the answer right, using scientific language and terms, and shouting out the answer, although that one was agreed by some students and not so much others. The bottom 5 characteristics, so being curious, working hard, discussing ideas with others, and sharing views and experiences, and being creative, were much less commonly associated. So what some of our teachers did is try to explicitly work on broadening that actually all those characteristics are parts of being sciencey. And so some of them use this questionnaire to see whether there was any change from the beginning to the end of the academic year. So pillar 1 is about personalizing and localizing science. And the aim of this strategy is to reduce the distance between science and students' lives, to make science more meaningful and relevant to them. We found that a lot of our teachers were very good at contextualizing science, sort of teaching science through real-life examples, but lots of those examples didn't necessarily resonate with the young people they were teaching. To be able to personalize and localize their teaching, their lessons, it was important for the teachers to get to know the students, get to know their hobbies, their interests, their aspirations. And that was often not a given, because at secondary, science teachers would teach a lot of classes and might only see one class a couple of times a year. So they needed to come up with strategies to both get more information and have that information available to be able to draw on what matters to their students when they taught different scientific topics. And with that information at hand, teachers were able to localize and personalize their teaching. This also meant that the examples would very likely be different in different classes and for different students. For example, what matters and what are the point of reference for someone living in a rural community in England would be quite different to someone who goes to school in a rough urban area of London or center of Madrid. So each of the classrooms was quite different. And I want to give you just a quick example of one of the lessons. So this one is a bit more general, but it was an example that lots of the students were able to relate to. So I'm going to read that out loud. Mr. Michael shows a slide with heat transfer and loss through doors, windows, and walls, and asks the students, what could we do to reduce the heat loss? Could you tell me of any examples of what your parents or someone you know has done to reduce heat loss where you or they live? And then the students discuss in small groups and record the answers on a mini whiteboard before reporting back to the whole class. So rather than sort of staying with the abstract examples of energy transfer and heat loss, Mr. Michaels related the science topic to the examples that lots of the students were familiar with. Having a well-isolated house is quite an issue in the UK. Our pillar 2 is about eliciting, valuing, and linking. The aim of this strategy is to make varied student contributions valuable and legitimate in the classroom, and to engage students with lower science capital, for whom talking about science or doing science outside of school, it was particularly important that teachers were broadening what kind of examples to elicit and sort of work with in the classroom. So teachers would elicit not only content knowledge, but also skills, interests, and what mattered to students. They would explicitly value those contributions, and they would link contributions to curriculum science to recognize existing knowledge as science-related and build new knowledge. Of course, this is easier in some situations than it is in others, but it was a productive practice. So both the first and the second pillar very much emphasize the importance of starting where students are at and build on their existing knowledge to help them engage in science in a meaningful way. Got an example here of eliciting, valuing, and linking. Julian suddenly asks, is insulin a protein? There was a lesson on proteins. Mr. Lloyd asks Julian to say what he knows about insulin and what it's used for. Julian says, my grandma has diabetes. She has to inject herself in the tummy with insulin. Mr. Lloyd asks Julian, do you know what the insulin does? Why does your grandma have to inject it? Julian replies with apparent pride that he knows the answer. Don't know where that came from. It sorts out her blood sugars. Most of us do it naturally, but some people don't have insulin or they have too much or something like that. So Julian was usually one of the quieter students who rarely contributed in class. But by Mr. Lloyd giving him an opportunity to share his experience, Julian felt that he was able to contribute and join the science-related conversations in the classroom. Okay. Third pillar. Third pillar is about building science capital dimensions, so it's most specific to the research that we did. As you remember before from the bag metaphor, it's sort of a compilation of all your science-related resources and dispositions, what you know, who you know, how you think, and what you do. And clearly, science teachers are taking the what you know very well. It's about science-related knowledge. But we found that other dimensions less often come into a typical science lesson. So those are the ones that we wanted to work with. So the aim of building science capital dimensions was to cultivate, recognize, and build student science capital and support students who may have fewer of those resources. So some of the science capital dimensions that I've got there would include the knowledge of transferability of science, the idea that science skills are useful even if you don't plan to become a scientist. Science media consumption. Some of our teachers, for example, would encourage students to watch documentaries or would give that as a homework and discuss it in the class. Participation in out-of-school science learning. Again, there might be families that go to a place like where we are today on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, and there are some who have never been. So teachers could promote free or cheap local science-related events if you know that there's something happening. Family skills science, knowledge and qualifications. Again, you might not be able to change what qualifications a parent has, but you might be able to help highlight that even if parents aren't working in a typical science job, they may be using some of the skills that are used in science, some of the science skills. Then knowing people in science jobs, talking science about everyday life, again, such as through homeworks, for example. Right, and my last excerpt from a lesson that we observed, Ms. Marquez says, "Can anyone tell me about any ad on TV for products that work to minimize microbe spreading?" She asked students to discuss in pairs. Ralph mentions a catch it, bin it, kill it. It's a very famous ad in the UK. Campaign he saw. A few other students are nodding. They remember this as well. Ms. Marquez asked him to describe the advert, and this says to the class, "It's great that you're making these connections. You could also ask your parents or grandparents what they know or about ad campaigns they remember, about the importance of making sure microbes don't spread." So the teacher reminded students both to think about science on TV ads and encourage family conversations to help build a science capital. Many of our teachers found it useful to keep a reflection diary as they were going through the process. And an example I show here is from a lesson when a teacher asked students to write a short paragraph about where the experience echoes and try and think of, from this experience, how the echoes were made and why they happened. So you see like lots of examples from school corridors, local caves, sports hall at school, and the teacher would write a brief reflection what it was that they thought worked particularly well. All right, I now have one more short video to show you.
Past 4 years, we've been working with teachers across the country to co-develop a science capital teaching approach. It's a mindset, really. It's working with your existing curriculum, it's not a whole new set of materials, and at the base of it is trying to broaden what counts as doing science in the classroom. But there are three main aspects of the approach. The first is personalising and localising science. This is going beyond just contextualising science, it's really linking it to young people's lives. There's then the idea of valuing what young people bring with them, so eliciting their ideas, their experiences, what they know about, what they care about, valuing this and linking it to science. The third aspect is building the different dimensions of science capital. For example, conveying the idea that science leads to lots of jobs, not just jobs in science.
Who's ever stood on one of these with a deaf? Stabbing into your foot, no?
Yeah, stabbing into your foot.
An example of how I'm able to localise today, we spoke about football boots to do with pressure, and we gave examples of their 3G pitch. The class is very athletic and a lot of them play the football on the 3G pitch that we've got outside. We had a picture on and they were like, oh God, yeah, we go on that. That's something that's in my life.
Where would you wear football boots?
On grass.
On grass. Where might you not wear football boots?
Like concrete.
Why is that?
I have a singer, so when we talk about sound, I can use her background. I have a dancer, so I can use that when we're talking about physics. So elicited value and linking is an important part of Science Capital. Being in a classroom, students always have something to say, so it's making sure what they're saying is actually valued, so they continue being in a position where they want to say something. Pressure, not enough weight, brilliant. You very often get students, well, science isn't important, I don't need the science for my job. So I think it's very important to show them that science is in everything that they do.
I feel like it's really helped me with my teaching. I feel like it's helped the students value learning science and made it absolutely relatable to their lives.
It's generating wider student engagement in the lesson. There's increased understanding, there's better student attitudes to science, and perhaps most important of all, it's been happier teachers.
It makes a massive difference to me in the engagement students have and how I look at the topic as well to make it more approachable for them so it's in their grasp. It's a subject that they can see themselves doing now, and hopefully that will continue in their coming years in school. They want to be there, they want to be in my classroom, they're bouncing up the corridor, they've got happy faces, and I get goodbyes out of them instead of they're just storming out the classroom.
It doesn't take a lot of time to do this, but the outcomes can be fantastic. It's a no-brainer.
Okay, so I hope that gave you a bit of a flavour of what it looks like and what teaching science in the UK is like with everybody in their uniforms. So what were the outcomes? We measured outcomes both through qualitative data, lots of interviews, lots of observations. Sorry, keep moving away from this. As well as surveys that we did at the beginning and at the end of the academic year. From questionnaires, we found that there were actually more students that planned to continue science after the age of 16 in the cohort that were involved. The science capital score slightly increased. Again, we wouldn't expect it to increase massively because of a lot of science capital scores relate to factors that are very much influenced by socialization and parental context. But that was nice to see that happened. More students also mentioned that they would talk to others about science outside school and, for example, engaged more with science online. This infographic, I know you can't see all the text, but it's also available on our website if anyone wants to have a closer look. From the interviews that we did with teachers and with students, we also found that there was increased interest and enjoyment of lessons. There was improved engagement. And as one of our teachers commented, students would pop up like meerkats when she did elements from the approach, which made her conclude they were more interested and engaged. So she said, so year 10 bottom sets are a very challenging group of students. Through the year, what I've noticed is when I use the approach, I can see it in your eyes. They're kind of like a meerkat. They pop up and you can see their engagement, and you can see that they talk about it a bit more. Students also spoke about improved understanding. One of them says he liked it because the teachers would teach you based on what you know, which helped him understand the topic better. Teachers also reported improved behavior and more inclusive classroom participation. So students that would normally not engage and not have that much to contribute felt that they could speak up more when they were adopting some of these principles of the science capital teaching approach. We did not specifically test for attainment. It's something that we hope to maybe do in the future to see what the impact is on the test scores in some sort of comparative study. But there was a perception from students, from the teachers, that the grades exceeded the target. So that was, we were pleased to hear that. And finally, a lot of the teachers reported having better connections with students, with increased satisfaction with the teaching. As one of them said, it's making life a lot easier because you're not just like bombarding them with information. You're drawing things that they understand that is relevant to them. That makes the lessons a bit more interesting and a bit more, successful, I think. So a few summary points. We would suggest that to make science teaching more inclusive and engaging, including for young people who think science isn't important for them and they don't need the science for the job, as one of the kids said in the video, that these principles of this approach can help. So we hope that you can help us share that approach with other teachers. It's important to provide support and time for teachers to reflect. It was quite a process when our teachers were adopting this approach because it's not a set add-on resource that you would do once. It's really a change in practice. It does take time. And then to sum up the key take-home points, it's important to emphasize the transferability of science and STEM for any jobs, not just jobs in science. By personalizing, localizing, and linking the science curriculum to what matters to your particular students, that would help the engagement with science. And wherever you can, focus on diversity, representation, and sometimes the implicit messages that are conveyed within a classroom. Thank you very much for listening. Muchas gracias. So that's the website where you can find the PDF, or if you drop us an email at ioe.sciencecapital, we can send you out a couple of packs as well. We always love hearing from teachers, especially if this is something you want to try and practice, do let us know how it went. And I think we have a couple of minutes for questions now before the break. Ooh. If anyone wants to ask me in Spanish, that should work as well. But I'm going to wait first. Is everybody ready for the break? Are we doing it in Spanish? English? Cool.
Hi. Spela, I want to know if you have thought to implement the science capital methodology or approach in other countries in the European Union, as this is a project in collaboration in your country with different companies. So have you thought about, or has any government contacted you to do it in other countries?
Yeah, so we currently have translations of this back in English and in Welsh. We have colleagues in Norway at the University of Oslo who translated this approach, and they're using it for professional development and teacher training in Norway. The project director, Professor Louise Archer, who was in the video, she's also done training sessions in several European countries. She's recently been in a training with all the teachers in Malta. We've done sessions in Greece. I've done a talk in Slovenia, which is where I'm from originally. So it sometimes varies. So in the UK, we try and embed this into teacher training, so and more extensive professional development, but we've done shorter sessions, but it usually be at least a day. So today, I think this was giving you a flavor of what it is, but it would usually be at least a day of different activities. So yes, we have done something, and we hope to do more in the future. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Hello.
Hello.
How, this is Miquel Duran from the University of Girona. I'm a scientist, and my social capital is 3, according to your survey. So I have a question. What should we answer when there are so many fake news out there? When Carlos Moreno told yesterday about so many pseudoscience ads in TV and everywhere. Okay? Well, you are pushing very hard, and I agree with you, and I loved your conclusion, okay? But what should we answer students when we tell us about, I don't know, okay, the hydrated water? What is the hydrated water?
Okay, so
Why should we take supplementary pills? Should we? That's great. But I guess that decreases the social capital of our society. We are not doing very much about it. We are thinking about it, we talk about it, but actually our politicians or whatever don't do much about it, or they cannot. So what's your feeling on that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I think what's been really important to us that this is the science capital teaching approach isn't just aimed at getting more people into science, but addressing the importance that the whole population needs to be scientifically literate, that this is something that we have to do and focus on. And you're very right, we have lots of challenges with the fake news. And I think some of the aspects of the science capital teaching approach, such as, for example, stressing the engagement with the media and being critical about the media, is helpful, but it needs to be on the bigger picture. Like it needs to be, I don't have the answer how to fight fake news, my God, but I think having those critical conversations already in school about what kind of science sources are reliable and what are not and how to deal with that is one of the ways to start contributing to that. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for your speech. I liked very much all your examples. I agree very much with all of them. I am teacher trainer. I would like to know, I'm trying to convince the headmasters, especially of the school boards, about in order to organize whole STEM project, taking into account the whole school. And I'm interested in particular the contributions that parents could make connecting their jobs, their STEM experiences, all kinds of experiences, with the schools. You mentioned some of them. Do you know any, or could you tell us please, some big experiences in convincing, communicating, making some dynamics with parents in order to involve them, participating with the schools?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So a lot of our teachers, so just to clarify, we have examples of how we encourage more parents to be involved. Yeah. In the UK, we find that the engagement with parents tend to happen much more in primary schools, so up to the age of 10, and it's quite common that parents come in, and then in the secondary this is much more occasional. So some of the examples that teachers we work with tried is one doing, for example, little homework questionnaires where the students would have to interview the parents about a topic that was broad and general enough that they could answer, just to start those conversations, whether it's about what they do to stop the microbe spreading or if they can think of job skills that they do in their job that could be science related. Some of the teachers invited parents to come to school, and what was particularly important that the parents weren't necessarily working in typical science jobs, but jobs where they tried to discuss how, even if you're not a lab scientist or an engineer, you might be using lots of science skills in your job. So they would have parents come into school and do a short talk and have a discussion about the skills needed for the jobs. So that's two of the examples.